In 2005, the police in Phoenix, the capital of Arizona in the United States, were experiencing one of the most stressful situations when several serial killers were simultaneously operating in their district, robbing, raping, and murdering women, men, and even pets. Mark Goudeau was originally from Phoenix and was born on September 6, 1964, into a lower-class family. He had 14 siblings, and Mark was the youngest of them. Some sources report that the Goudeau family had problems with illegal substances. Although not all of them went down a bad path, many became good and hard-working people. Mark's mother died when he was 12 years old, and he moved in with his older sister. He attended high school, where he played American football, although not as well as his older brother Michael. In high school, due to financial difficulties, Mark Goudeau was forced to start working. Subsequently, the guy lost interest in studying and, due to poor academic performance, was forced to drop out of school in 1982, shortly before graduating from the 12th grade. In the same year, a girl contacted the police, who stated that during 1981, Mark and his brother Michael repeatedly raped her on the territory of her house. However, during the investigation, the police found that the girl led an antisocial lifestyle and voluntarily entered into an intimate relationship with her brothers, which is why her testimony was questioned. No charges were filed against Mark Goudeau, and the girl soon left Phoenix. But that was just the beginning. At the age of 23, Mark Goudeau was arrested for trespassing, a year later for drunk driving, and at the age of 25 he was charged with sexual assault and attempted second-degree murder. The victim's identity was not disclosed, but she was referred to in the press as Darling. In the early morning of August 6, 1989, the police responded to a call from people who reported that a man was beating a semi-conscious woman with a rifle butt in a parking lot. Officers who responded to the call found Darling naked to the waist and with a bleeding head. Eyewitnesses said they saw a man leaving, and that he had an extra revolver with him. The woman was hospitalized with a fractured skull, deep lacerations and bruises all over her body. When she was able to testify 3 days later, she stated that Mark Goudeau was the attacker and gave her address. Darling said that they knew each other, and that while in her apartment, Mark repeatedly beat her, threw her into a bathtub and tried to drown her, but she managed to escape, and her attacker chased her to a parking lot. Police arrested Goudeau, who, according to him, had consensual sexual relations with Darling, when two armed men, one of whom was carrying a machine gun, beat her and left. He stated that he had helped the woman get to her grandmother's house, when the men returned and beat her again, after which they ran away. Of course, no one believed him. Mark was facing decades in prison, but a series of mistakes and judicial indulgences allowed him to reach a plea bargain, according to which Goudeau pleaded guilty to several counts of aggravated assault, and charges of dangerous behavior were dropped. This allowed him to be eligible for parole in a year. However, when he was supposed to be sentenced, Goudeau, who, for some reason, was at large, robbed a supermarket. With the help of a silver pistol, which will be described in a number of other cases, he forced the staff to accompany him to the car. But this scene was seen by many people, who notified the authorities, informing them of the car model and its license plate. Officers soon detained Mark, his shooting range, along with the stolen money. One would think that the charges of armed robbery and kidnapping would complement the charges already brought against him in the attack on Darling, and therefore he would receive a more substantial sentence. However, in fact, for raping a woman, the judge sentenced Mark to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years, and in the second case, also thanks to a plea bargain, he was sentenced to only 4 years. After 13 years in prison, on March 8, 2004, Mark Goudeau appeared at a hearing before the State Parole Board. It was established there that he had behaved well in prison, and had completed several self-help programs. In addition, the prisoner married a woman named Wendy Carr, with whom he lived before his incarceration. At the hearing, Wendy and a prison activist spoke out in favor of Goudeau, who stated that alcohol and illegal substances were the reason for his bad behavior. As a result, the commission, in whose hands the decision was, voted 4-1 for the early release of Mark Goudeau. Mark and Wendy started living together again, to start a new life away from crime. According to available information, the man got a job as a handyman in a large construction company. There he was considered a diligent worker, and was popular with his colleagues. The life of the couple and society in general in the area was developing normally, but a series of crimes began to threaten the peace of Phoenix residents. On August 6, 2005, 3 teenage girls were attacked by an armed man who forced them to go behind a church on a road called Baseline Road, where he abused 2 of them. This was the beginning of a long list of crimes that in the following months kept the city's public on high alert, and the security services in a tense search for the perpetrator. A week later, on August 14th, another sexual assault was reported, as a result of which the victim's belongings were stolen. 3 weeks later, in early September, the murder of a young woman, Georgia Thompson, who was only 19 years old, was reported. Her body was found in an unbuttoned shirt and trousers, with a gunshot wound to the head. Her wallet was never found. Another sexual assault occurred on September 15th. And just 5 days later, 2 young sisters walking home from the park became new victims. One of the girls was pregnant, but this did not stop the man from attacking them and forcing them to move to a secluded place at gunpoint, where he raped the younger girl, pointing a gun at her pregnant sister's stomach. On September 28, 2005, 2 separate crimes were registered: robbery and sexual assault with robbery. In the following days, weeks, and months, the crimes continued to combine into a mix of sexual assaults and robberies. These cases were recorded in a radius close to Baseline Row, so the unknown perpetrator became known as Bell's rapist. Numerous crimes were committed on November 3rd and 7th. On November 3rd, at 20 o'clock, a robbery was recorded, and not far from this place, 9 minutes later, a sexual assault. On the same day, a man described as dark-skinned, with dreadlocks and a fishing hat, entered the store and, threatening with a gun, stole $720. Less than 10 minutes later, a report was received that a man in a Halloween costume and massive glasses had sexually assaulted a girl who was putting things in a donation basket. After the attack, the perpetrator demanded that the victim take him around the corner, as he had just committed a robbery. 4 days later, a mysterious man robbed 11 people between restaurants that stood on the same street. After the last robbery, the criminal fired into the air. The bullet casing was removed, but on December 12th, the already difficult situation only worsened. That night, Phoenix homicide detectives were called to the scene of the discovery of a woman's body behind a warehouse. Investigators arrived at the scene and found the body of a woman and face up in a pool of blood. The woman was shot twice in the head at close range, but she had no wallet, no documents, only a shopping bag with a Christmas pattern. A man contacted the police, who reported that he might have seen the killer. His name was Pete Arco, and he worked in the warehouse where, according to him, there was a fast food outlet, behind which the body was found. According to Peter, he heard a knock on the back door and thought that children were playing soccer in the area. Arco went outside to drive them away, and saw a man in a hooded sweatshirt bending over a motionless body. The hooded man also saw Arco, stood up and pointed his silver-colored pistol at the worker. He fired, but the gun didn't go off. Peter immediately ran away and locked himself in the warehouse. At the scene, investigators found 2 spent bullet casings, 38 caliber, and a whole bullet that didn't hit Pete. The next day, authorities identified the victim as 39-year-old Tina Washington, who worked at the kindergarten she was leaving when she was attacked. Authorities notified Tina's family and asked one of her adult sons if his mother was wearing jewelry. The grief-stricken young man replied that she was wearing a very unusual ring, on which the names of her 3 children were written next to each of the stones. One of the investigators recalled that a note was distributed at the police department about a man sexually assaulting and robbing women in the Baseline Row area. He wondered if there was a connection between this and other cases. In early 2006, the Phoenix police created a special task force of experienced detectives to investigate these cases and assigned about 100 street police officers to support the investigations on an ongoing basis. Police officers released a sketch of a man with dreadlocks and a fishing hat, compiled according to the statements of the victims. The sketch was distributed to all media outlets. The police held meetings with the public to distribute the image, which was later posted on advertising accounts offering a reward of $100,000 for information, leading to the arrest of the man. But the number of crimes continued to grow. On February 20, 2006, shortly after 7:30 a.m., the lifeless bodies of 38-year-old Romeo Vargas and 30-year-old Tina Myrna Palmer Roman were found in the food truck in which they worked. Both were shot dead. The following month, on March 15th, 2 employees of the Schiss restaurant were found dead. The body of Liliana Sanchez Cabrera, 20 years old, was found in the parking lot of a fast food restaurant, and the body of her colleague, Chow Chow, 2 kilometers away from this place. Both were shot in the head. 2 weeks later, on March 29th, a local businessman called the police after finding traces of blood in the parking lot. The authorities arrived at the scene, but a search of the territory did not reveal anything. A week later, the same applicant contacted the police again, as he found the woman's body in a state of deep decomposition and with a gunshot wound to the head. The victim was identified as Nicole Gibson. On April 10th, an 8-year-old boy was returning home from school when he entered the house and heard water running in the bathroom. When he entered, he found the body of his mother, Sofia Nunez. The cause of death was a headshot. On May 1st, in the parking lot of the same restaurants, where 11 people were robbed in November, a man wearing a latex Halloween mask abducted a woman from inside a car and sexually assaulted her. The task of the investigators was not easy. There were no witnesses to the incident. And to make matters worse, there was another series of random victims, including men, women, and even pets, who were shot from a moving car. Other serial killers operated in parallel. In late June, 37-year-old Carmen Miranda was abducted from a car wash while she was on the phone with her boyfriend, who heard her screams when she was attacked. The attacker overpowered her, got behind the wheel of a car and drove about 100 meters, parking behind a barber shop, where the woman was later found with a gunshot wound to the forehead. This attack was captured by a surveillance camera, but the image was too grainy to recognize the attacker. At this time, the criminal was renamed the Bayline Killer. You, like me, probably have a question. How, with such a large number of sexual assaults, was there no mention of DNA samples to identify the perpetrator? Subsequently, a court case in the highest instance claimed that the police department had failed to check the available DNA samples in a timely manner. Perhaps that was partly the case. After all, with the onset of summer, the detectives leading the case began to insist on more urgent processing of DNA evidence. As it became known, investigators found DNA on the breast of a girl who was attacked in the presence of her pregnant sister. Phoenix laboratory specialists immediately removed a sample from the left breast, which was contaminated, but it was still preserved. However, after analyzing it, they came to the conclusion that this was not enough to identify the suspect. This and other samples were sent to the Arizona State Crime Lab, which had more resources than the Phoenix lab, and a list of 75 potential suspects was sent there. Meanwhile, the state prison investigator contacted the task force on the case and reported that a certain woman claims to have seen a sketch of Byline's killer and knows who he is. She recognized him as Mark Goudeau. The woman turned out to be Darling, whose rape landed him in jail for the first time. It was ordered to determine the location of the man and establish surveillance over him. On July 21, 2006, a detective and the probation officer visited Mark, and he agreed to provide the requested fingerprints and DNA samples. Ballistics experts were able to analyze bullets and shell casings found at the crime scene and at the victims, and found that they were all fired from the same weapon, an 8 caliber pistol. Thus, it was confirmed that all these cases are related, and that the same person is responsible for them. Finally, experts from the Arizona State Crime Laboratory analyzed a sample taken from the left breast, and using a new procedure, they were able to isolate and identify the male DNA. On September 2, 2006, they informed the Phoenix police that the genetic sample belonged to Mark Goudeau. Later, the same profile will be found in other rape victims. On September 6, the day of his 40th birthday, Goudeau was arrested without resistance in front of his house. He was initially arrested for raping one of his sisters, and over time the charges were expanded to several other cases of sexual assault. Most of the attacks were carried out in a perimeter of about 4 kilometers from Mark's house. Investigators conducted several searches in Goudeau's house. Among the first items seized was a pair of white sneakers, which attracted the attention of the police, as many victims referred to the fact that the attacker used white or black shoes. Despite the fact that the shoes were washed, the examination found the DNA of 2 murdered victims in them. One belonged to the man killed by Mark Cho, and the other belonged to Nicole Gibson, who was killed at the end of March 2005. The lead detective in the case was unhappy that only the white sneakers were seized, suspecting that there might be more evidence on the other shoes. Since almost all of Goudeau's victims were shot at close range, based on the evidence obtained from the first pair of shoes, a warrant was issued for a second search of Mark's house. The task of collecting and analyzing the rest of the shoes became titanic, as Goudeau had dozens of pairs of shoes, but the work was worth it. Some items of clothing, including Tina Washington's ring and bracelet, were found inside a brown leather shoe and an airtight plastic sandwich bag. After Mark Goudeau's arrest, his wife, Endika, became his main defender, arguing that the Phoenix police findings were a lie, and that officials planted evidence found in their home to frame her husband and gain fame by solving one of the most shocking criminal cases in Arizona. But Phoenix police have published hundreds of pages detailing all the steps taken during the investigation of Byline's killer. It became known that the investigators had at least 10 suspects, but in the course of further investigation, they had already excluded several people. The name of Mark Goudeau appears in these documents, albeit in rare mentions. Phoenix police have filed 74 charges against Mark Goudeau with prosecutors, including committing 9 first-degree murders, including the murder of Sofia Nunez on April 10, 2006, who, as it became known, knew her attacker because he installed a video surveillance system in her house. In addition, there are 5 sexual assaults, 3 attempted sexual assaults, 10 counts of kidnapping, 12 counts of armed robbery, 4 counts of attempted armed robbery, 3 counts of sexual assault, 9 counts of juvenile delinquency, 13 counts of aggravated assault, and 3 counts of indecent assault. In March 2017, the prosecution announced that it would seek the death penalty for Goudeau and claimed that the dead women did not allow themselves to be raped. The trial against Mark took place in 2 separate court sessions, one of which took place in 2007 and the other in 2011. Almost the only thing the defense contested was the legality of the search of the defendant's house, implying that the evidence found there had been planted by the police. By the time the 2 trials ended, Mark Goudeau had been found guilty of 76 crimes against 17 victims. For this, he received 16 sentences of 34 years in prison, as well as a death sentence for each of the 9 murders. Mark Goudeau is currently on death row in Arizona. Other serial killers who operated in parallel with Mark Goudeau were Dale Hausner and Samuel Dietman. They committed the vast majority of their crimes by shooting from a moving car, apparently motivated by a sporting interest. But they were also arsonists and hired killers. From May 2005 to August 2006, they killed 8 people in at least 9 shootings, allegedly under the influence of illegal substances. As a result, many people and pets were injured, and several fires were started. This duo was also eventually apprehended by the authorities and brought to trial, resulting in Dale Hausner being sentenced to death without parole, and Samuel being sentenced to life in prison without parole.
What do you think about this story? Write your opinion in the comments, and also subscribe to my YouTube channel.